Welcome to the Erasing Shame podcast. I'm your co-host, DJ Chuang, and I'm joined with Dr. Jessica Chu. And we are talking about the topic of relationships in a marriage and how to enrich those in preparation for becoming parents. And we know that is a huge topic, and there are volumes of books and studies about that. But as Asian Americans, we grow up with a unique family dynamic. And as we're talking over the holiday season, those memories revisit us as we look at the relationship of our parents and of our uncles and aunties and other relatives. And we wonder, what would a healthy relationship look like for ourselves? So whether we're single or young married, this is a conversation for you. Jessica, thank you for joining me for another conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so as a young married couple, let's say they've been married for a couple years now. They're learning each one another's habits and quirkiness in doing the daily routines. And then what are some issues that young married couples come across in their early years that kind of surprises them, that they didn't expect during the dating years? And then later on, we'll talk a bit about how can they better prepare to be parents.
Yeah, wow, that's a great question. I think a lot of times when we're in our dating years, it's that honeymoon phase. For I want to say for most Christians, there's this idea of like getting married. That's the next step, and always thinking about that next step. And so I think it's in our cultural, we don't want to just be mediocre. We want to be on top of the next thing. And so when we are dating, we're with this intention of getting married. And when we're married after a few years, we're with this intention of wanting to have children. And I think that there's a window of time where a lot of couples, they begin to think about that next step, not fully understanding why or what, or whether there's a trigger that even comes up. And the only reason why they maybe reflect on having kids is when they can't, or when they're not in control. And so then they begin to look at, why is it not happening? And they'll look into the medical issues. But on the emotional aspect, I think it's really interesting because a lot of couples, they don't really look, well, I don't want to say a lot. I think if we don't have a good understanding of ourselves and just looking around the relationships that we have, like with our families, our friendships, our community, if you are not seeing that there is, I don't want to even say robust, but if there aren't intimate relationships in those three buckets of family, friends, and community. Community could be your faith community, your workout community, your work community. If there aren't intimate relationships in those areas, I think it's important to kind of look within and kind of figure out why those things are not there. And often I think when we begin to kind of have a self-assessment, things will come up for us. And I'm with this idea that, there are a lot of, as parents, there's this top down, there's a vertical relationship.
Yes.
I think many parents desire optimal and best for their next generation without really re-examining what would be hindering that for the next generation. And we can't really examine that without looking at our own, at ourselves, and really looking at the past generation, and with our relationship with our parents and our parents' relationship with their parents, because we really will see a pattern. And so I think this is a really important and insightful time for young couples or individuals, or even, parents who've never done the work and are come up against the rift of like, I love my child, but it's so hard to love them. I think there are certain things like that where they have to kind of recognize what is it that's triggering them so much. I think that would be a much better way to look at it, rather than saying like, you're annoying or you're wrong or you're upsetting me, but really focusing like, what about this is making me feel, rather than looking at the external and maybe blaming. We can do blame or shame. It's a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes I
Yes.
think within a context of a dyad in relationship, if it's not our partner, or if it's not the other, then we have to kind of become more introspective and think about what's going on here. Yeah.
Wow, there's so much that you've said there, and I'll take some moment to unpack and digest that, because
Okay.
for many people, they have not had the exposure or understanding of relationship dynamics. Those that haven't had therapy, or those that have had therapy, have maybe only worked on their individual self, but not the relational dynamic. And you mentioned this idea of intimacy, or actually you start with a narrative. And so it's not just a Christian story, it's kind of the Asian American story, or the human story, that after you're graduated from college, then you start looking for a mate, and then you build a home, and you want to establish the family, and the rinse and cycle repeat. The next generation does the same thing, and every or many families aspire to that. But in our cultural context, we don't have the rites of passage and the rituals and things that really teach us what intimacy looks and feels like. Even that word is relegated to the lingerie section in the department store, but
Right.
we don't really know what it looks and feels like in a marriage relationship. So talk us through what does that look and feel like when it wasn't particularly modeled in many of our families?
Yes. Oh,
Because
that's so amazing.
families tend to be functional. If you're providing for yourself, you're healthy and you're functional, what else is wrong?
Man, that word functional is not that it's triggering, but it resonates so much with my private practice and some of the
Mm,
families that I work with when I'm doing
mhm,
couples therapy. There's nothing wrong per se.
mhm.
We're getting along, the kids are good, but there is something lacking.
There you
And
go.
I think it's just we can function, we can operate well. It's not nobody hates each other, we're
Mhm,
functional, but there is a lack of intimacy and connectedness.
mhm,
And you're right. I will say for and I don't want to just say men, but I will say because our society is skewed more where men aren't supposed to be emotional or connected, the word intimacy then becomes more of this physical act. So
mhm,
when I talk with some of my couples, they will think that intimacy means that we're having a lot of sex or we're being physically engaging. And intimacy is not that's an aspect of that. It's a byproduct. Physical intimacy, I believe, is the byproduct of our connectedness. It's not that physical intimacy is
mm,
connectedness.
mhm,
And there's a huge difference.
mhm,
I think for many women, we desire, and not always, I don't want to create a generalized statement, but I will say most of the time when I'm looking within the context of marriage,
mhm,
men might say, oh, well, we're physically intimate, or I'll
mhm,
ask, what's the frequency of physical intimacy? And the
mhm,
reason why I'm looking for that is because when I believe that couples are emotionally connected, physical intimacy will be the natural byproduct of how
mhm,
frequently they're having physical intimacy. And that's not just sex, it's touch, hug,
mm,
cuddling, comfort. Like there's such a gamut of physical intimacy. It can be
mhm,
holding hands,
mhm,
right? In some ways, I think holding hands can be much more intimate than just this, what we see in the movies, right?
mhm.
these subtleties of showing how we care. But our physical act of loving someone is really through connection. I think when we see, okay, when young couples are together, or we're in the, not young couples, but newer couples, they can't get their hands off each other. They're like sitting on each other's laps at the restaurant. They're just so engaged. Like they have this deep curiosity for one another.
Yes.
And not to say that that shouldn't be there as marriage evolves and as it grows, but I think that intimacy begins to deepen and mature. And it's not just this physical thing, it's a deep, profound love and respect for one another, and that evolves in the way that we put our hand on their back, or we give them hugs for no reason. And a lot of times I think what erupts is in marriages, one partner will see how a partner will give love and intimacy to their children, but withhold that from their partner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I think it's like, I know my partner is capable of giving me such intimacy because I see them do it with our children all the time. But because that is not experienced in their marital dyad from the top down, it becomes very hurtful. So intimacy is really about connectedness. Do I know you? Not do I know what you're doing? Do I know what your day looks like? When people tell me, how are you? And they say fine, I'm like, fine is not an emotional word. It's the status quo that things are functional and okay. There's no crisis, right? But intimacy is, do I know what they're thinking? Oh, I know what it must be like because they have a meeting today, or a big meeting today, or they have, something coming up and I could sense that they're nervous and I just want to give them a hug before they leave. Those can be very connected and intimate moments, right? That then later we want to express with more physical touch. But physical touch is not intimacy.
Correct. And then, so you've described it well, emotional connectedness, and that can be expressed physically through touch, through looks, and things that may lead up to physical connection as well. But it also comes through the conversations that we have as we share our thoughts, dreams, feelings, and some of us may not be as well versed in expressing our feelings. It takes some practice, and there's other ways to express feelings through art and music and writing and all kinds of other expressions. But sometimes those words and expressions don't quite connect, and there's misunderstanding and there's conflict. So how do we get past those things to regain the fulfilling part of intimacy?
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much to unpack there. When you said, emotional connection, and we can connect through talking, and again, that word of curiosity comes. Like oftentimes I think many people, what they do, let's say hobbies, we don't have the same hobbies, but I hear a lot of couples, they watch shows together. Those are not bad things. But I think when we lack the ability to really commune and communicate with one another, I love movies and I love TV shows, but it diminishes my ability to really engage with my partner in a meaningful way, to really know what's on his mind. And I think, again, going back to the a cultural context of, I don't want to say it's not just for men, it can be for women too. But oftentimes when we are going through something, if it was not modeled for us to talk about it and just explicitly share, like, hey, mom, hey, dad, I'm going through a really hard time, versus dad's going through a hard time right now, so let's not say anything. Or let's just be, you're an older brother and older sister, so let's just let, your younger siblings just have it. And why don't you just, be patient or be still or not share? right? That
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that it's not loving, but what it communicates is that I shouldn't speak up. And maybe I shouldn't just share because that would be burdensome to mom or dad or to anybody else. And as we grow up, that idea and identity is practiced and fostered. And so in the context of marriage, it's not so it's not, second nature for me to just be like, hey, I had a really hard day. It's more like, let's watch a show and
Mm.
sit in silence and not talk about the hard day because I want you to enjoy the show. And I want to redefine how we invite intimacy, because I think so many times it's expected for, oh, why didn't you say anything? Like, why don't you just
Mm-hmm.
share? And there's a lot of resistance with just simply sharing. We have to figure out, is it the right time? Do you have capacity? Does my
Yes.
partner have capacity to
Mm-hmm.
listen? Um, and so there's just a lot of things, and I think that can build up the conflict and the disconnection, right? Because we're not sharing about what's really on our mind. And every day we go through the day, there are these micro experiences. They're not big crisis every day, but we didn't like that saying, or we didn't feel good about that. And slowly they build up. And I think that's where a lot of times when I'm working with couples or young couples or just people who have been together for years, it just became this functional type marriage where we're not crisis, we don't hate each other, but man, we don't talk. We're
Mm.
completely disconnected. I have no idea what my partner likes, right? And
Mm-hmm.
um, that's where the conflict ensues. I think the crisis can look scarier too, where we're just yelling and screaming. But I also think that our silence and our passive aggression and our passivity can be equally as damning and harmful in the relationship as,
Mm.
you know, breaking dishes and screaming and yelling, and dare I say, even like, you know, breaking things and hitting things, right? Like it's I don't want to say abuse is equally as the same thing
Mm.
as passive, but I will say it is still damaging. And it
Mm-hmm.
requires both partners in a relationship to really be intentional. And when we're not practicing how to reach out, we got to understand why. What is the resistance for me to reach out to you, my safe person, my partner?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about how can I learn to be more inviting for a connecting conversation with my partner.
Yeah. I think one of the ways that, it can even start with, I call it check-ins, 10-minute check-ins,
Hmm.
where, usually it's a 10-minute check-in. Sometimes it's less and sometimes it's 2 hours, right? But we have this thing where, we know we want to watch a show, or we know we want to, just kind of wind down.
Mhm.
But I asked my partner, hey, can we do this? Can I just check in with you before we turn on the TV? How are you doing? What was your day like? Right. I think one of the things I even ask, um, I have a bedtime routine with my young one. And one of the questions I ask is, what was something great that made you laugh, that made you smile? Right. What was the high of the day? Was there anything during your day that made you feel sad, not good,
Mhm.
upset? Even in the slightest way, I try to scale it 1 to 10,
Mhm.
and then what are we grateful for? I
Mhm.
like to kind of tie it up with those 3 questions, but it's something that I even ask my partner, just like, and sometimes we don't get past all the hard stuff of that day. We just talk about the hard stuff, and I just want to provide a listening ear. But I think it's how can we become more curious about our partner, right?
Mhm.
How can we show interest in our partner? I think that's the first question, right? Where can we find commonality? Because we all feel every single day. Maybe I didn't
Mhm.
feel big today, but Yeah, I think today there was not too much dissonance. It was okay. What about for
Mm-hmm.
you? Right. But still
Mm-hmm.
giving one another an ability to answer those questions. Google 10 questions, like 10 questions to ask on a date. I have a bunch of like cards. I use table topics. I have table topics all over my house. There's one in our dining room, and just random questions to just get us to think. Would you rather live in the mountains or by the beach?
Mm-hmm.
Just random things to just get us to think. And I think that can begin to share our dreams, and how we answer those questions begin to reflect what we value, what childhood was like, maybe even just it evokes something about a past memory or thought. And it's fascinating. And I get curious. Yeah.
Well, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for walking us through what that actually looks like and feels like.
Mm.
It gives us some handles on what a check-in looks like, because I've heard the phrase, but I didn't know how to actually um, do that beyond the fill in the blank. How are you really? And sometimes that puts the other person on the spot because um, those of you that remember uh, school days and filling out an essay, and it's this big blank page and you got to fill it out with an essay, and that's much harder than multiple choice or something where you have some prompts to answer the question. So that's really good. Was there a highlight in the day? Was there a struggle? Um, what surprised you, and what are you grateful for? So those are some great handles to draw someone out and to show a posture of openness and curiosity and desire to learn and desire to connect.
I will say one more question that
Mm-hmm.
I got from Brene Brown was that she said, "What's on your mind and what's on your heart?" And I love that question because what's on your mind oftentimes is, I have to do this, I have to do that. There's like all these tasks
Mm-hmm.
that we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like thinking about what I need to prepare for tomorrow. But what's been on my heart is, man, I miss my friend. I haven't talked to this person in a while, or I want to build more closeness with my partner and I just don't know how. I feel alone in our relationship these days, or and I think it begins to just kind of separate the to-dos and the function versus like the more intimate thoughts and dreams and values that we carry. And I don't know, for some couples that might be too much, that might feel too intimate sometimes. And we're going to take baby steps. So if that
Mm-hmm.
is, then maybe we don't have to do that. But I think being specific, not just a how are you, I think that can get so broad, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
what's something specific that made you smile? And what's something specific that made you feel not so great? Smallest thing, the cashier just had an attitude with me today, right? That's a ugh. I'm sorry that happened to you, right? And
Yes.
what are we grateful for? Because there's always, always, always something to be grateful for.
Mm.
So it's a great way to kind of tie up that 10-minute check-in if it doesn't go longer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. In a day and age when we have so many streaming services and thousands of videos, it's funny how in our dating ritual that going to the movie is still a popular thing for people to do. And yet it doesn't add a lot to the relationship, although it is a shared experience. But the opportunity perhaps there is after the movie, have a conversation about the movie, like which character did you connect with, which one stood out to you, prompted a reaction. And then even during the check-in, I was the image that came to mind is like feelings. As I'm learning about my own introspection, feelings are like signals or the icons on the dashboard of a car.
Right.
So when you have those moments of feelings, they prompt you um, to share an experience and
Yes.
to share an expression of who you are and what you're seeking and yearning in life. And so as we close this episode, I thought we could check in with each other and demonstrate what that would look like and give us an opportunity to connect too. So we're at the end of the year and 2023 is around the corner. So I'd be curious to hear what you're dreaming of and looking forward to in 2023.
I think for me as a mom and a partner, um, I think it's always a struggle to have balance. And so I have to be intentional about how present I am with my partner and with my child. And so that's something that I'm really looking forward to, just consistently building on that relationship. I don't want to let that go as time is passing. And so I'm always thinking about ways of how do I build more connectedness with my partner and with my child. I look forward to that. And so that's something that is always on the top of my mind. Um, and I guess the things to do is just, I know that when I am able to take care of myself, when I'm doing things that I enjoy, it gives me much more capacity to love my family and really sow into relationships with my community. And so I'm looking forward to that and having a better balance with work, life, and family. Yeah.
Beautiful.
What about for you?
Well, 2023 is looking very hopeful for me. I've got a friend that's going to help me launch this new initiative that we're embarking on called Christian Asian Mental Health. And I'm really connecting with the word connectedness that you've described, because I certainly want to connect with my partner, my wife, and my son, Jeremiah, who's now 25. I'm getting better connection now with my mom and two brothers who live in Maryland. I'm here in California. I just visited with them for a week, a couple weeks ago. And we have a baby niece who's now 11 months old. So I'm looking for any and every excuse to fly out there and to watch her grow. So she's starting to walk now. So that's been a real joy. And connectedness, I want to be connecting with more churches around the country and help them to develop their mental health ministry and become a community of care. And so we're looking for those connections and conversations so that we can come alongside like concierge service and show churches how to develop ways of showing care and compassion through sermons, stories, seminars, and support groups, and really provide that place of belonging and connectedness that complements what therapy and medication provides for those who struggle with mental health diagnoses, as well as just everyday stresses of life, anxiety, worry, grief, trauma, even abuse. I think the church has such a vital role to be the hands and feet of Jesus to love one another.
The connected self can connect with others, right? If we can connect with ourselves, then it will be such a natural byproduct to connect with others. If we are not connected to ourselves, then how can we connect with others? It's very difficult. It's much more taxing, and there will be much more resistance. And so understanding that concept and maybe even finding grace for those that have not connected with you in this holiday season with families and all the joy and dysfunction it carries. I hope we can kind of hold on to that. We cannot connect well with others if we are not connected well with self. And thinking about the relationships that you yearn to connect with, are they connected with themselves?
Yes.
And thinking about that.
And we all can connect better as we're connected with God.
Absolutely.
Together, as he has demonstrated in the Trinity himself, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Yes.
Well, Thank you so much, Jessica. It was so great to connect with you on this conversation. And thank you, Erasing Shame audience, for watching and listening. Bless you, and look forward to connecting with you in the new year. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Erasing Shame podcast. Check out the show notes at erasingshame.com and subscribe to our email for updates. We would love to hear from you, so please add your comments at our website or on social. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app, and you can also subscribe on YouTube or follow on Facebook. Please add a rating and review so we can reach more people with our message of health, hope, and compassion. This podcast is the digital outreach of Christian Asian mental health. Please consider partnering with us by making a tax-deductible donation at erasingshame.com, and together we can resolve the mental health crisis for every person. Thank you.